Forget everything you've seen in movies. The graceful twirling sword fights, the dramatic one-on-one duels, it's a spectacular lie. The truth about medieval combat is far more brutal, far more practical, and frankly, a lot more interesting. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the Hollywood fantasy to reveal the gritty, bone-crushing reality of the medieval battlefield. Let's start with the biggest myth of all, the all-powerful swordmaster. You know the image. A lone hero, blade flashing, cutting through hordes of enemies. It's pure fiction. For starters, swords were expensive. Your average soldier couldn't afford one. They were a status symbol, a sidearm, not the primary weapon of war. And the way they were used, it wasn't ballet. Real historical combat manuals, like those from Fiore de Liberi or Hans Stahlhofer, don't show elegant fencing. They show something much closer to street fighting. We're talking wrestling, grappling, trips, and using leverage to throw your opponent to the ground. They teach techniques like half-swording, where a fighter would grip the middle of their own blade to use the sword like a short spear, aiming for precise, deadly stabs. Or even better, the mordhau, which literally translates to murder stroke. You'd flip the sword around and bash your enemy's head in with the pommel or crossguard. It wasn't about looking cool, it was about ending the fight, fast. Now let's talk about armor. In movies, a sword slices through a fully armored knight like a hot knife through butter. That is physically impossible. A well-made suit of plate armor was the medieval equivalent of a walking tank. No sword, no matter how sharp, was cutting through that solid steel. So what did real fighters do? They didn't waste energy on useless swings against the chest plate. They aimed for the gaps, the armpits, the groin, the visor slits, the joints at the elbows and knees. These were the kill zones. This is why grappling was so essential. You had to get up close and personal, control your opponent's weapon, and wrestle them into a position where you could slip a dagger into one of those gaps. The goal wasn't to cut, but to puncture. Or you down, simply beat them until the person inside the metal con was too concussed or broken to fight back. This brings us to another Hollywood favorite, dual wielding. It looks awesome, right? 2 swords, double the trouble. In reality, it was just a dumb idea. Wielding 2 swords means you have 2 weapons for attack, but absolutely 0 for defense. You've given up your ability to parry effectively, and you've certainly given up the option of using a shield. A much more common and practical combination was a sword and a dagger, often called a rondelle dagger, which was perfect for exploiting those armor gaps we just talked about. But even that wasn't the top choice for a soldier heading into battle. So if not swords, then what were the true kings of the medieval battlefield? I'll give you a hint. They're long, pointy, and not nearly as glamorous. We're talking about spears and polearms. A simple spear was cheap to make, easy to learn, and devastatingly effective. It gave a soldier reach, keeping the enemy and their sharp, pointy things at a safe distance. Wars weren't won by flashy individuals. They were won by disciplined formations. And nothing demonstrates this better than the pike square. A block of soldiers armed with pikes, essentially very long spears, was the medieval machine gun nest. A charging unit of heavily armored knights, the most feared force of their day, would be stopped dead in their tracks, impaled on a forest of steel points. And it wasn't just spears. The battlefield was filled with an incredible variety of polearms, each a specialized tool for a specific job. You had halberds, which combined the point of a spear, the blade of an axe, and a hook on the back for pulling knights off their horses. You had glaives, billhooks, and poleaxes, brutal, versatile weapons that could hook, chop, crush, and stab. These were the real workhorses of medieval warfare. But what about killing from a distance? Enter the archers, the snipers of the Middle Ages. Don't let video games fool you into thinking bows were weak. The English longbow, for example, was a terrifying weapon of mass destruction. It required immense strength to draw, with pull weights often exceeding 100 pounds. A skilled archer could fire 10 to 12 arrows a minute. Now imagine a few thousand archers doing that at the same time. This wasn't about pinpoint accuracy on a single target. It was about volley fire. The sky would literally turn black with arrows, a rain of death that could decimate enemy formations before they even got close. Arrows from a powerful longbow or a crossbow could punch through lighter armor and, at the very least, disrupt, wound, and shatter the morale of even the most heavily armored knights. Archers didn't fight fair. They just killed, efficiently and from a distance. As armor technology improved, cutting and stabbing became less effective. So how do you defeat a man in a steel can? You don't try to cut the can, you crush the man inside it. This is where blunt force weapons truly shine. Warhammers, maces, and flails weren't designed to cut. They were designed to transfer concussive force directly through the armor. A blow from a warhammer might not break the steel, but it would absolutely break the bones underneath it. It could dent a helmet so badly that the wearer couldn't see or breathe, or simply cause a fatal concussion. The sheer, brutal impact of these weapons was terrifying. The sight, and more importantly, the sound of a mace crushing a helmet was a psychological weapon in itself, capable of breaking an enemy's will to fight. So, let's put it all together. What was a real medieval battle like? Forget the long, drawn-out duels. Real combat was a chaotic, desperate affair that was often over in seconds. It was a clash of formations, not individuals. Fatigue was a massive killer. Wearing 50 pounds of armor and wielding a heavy weapon is exhausting. Soldiers would collapse from heat stroke and exhaustion without ever being touched by an enemy blade. Teamwork, discipline, and sheer grit decided the outcome far more than individual skill. Weapons broke, armor failed, and the whole thing was less about honor and more about pure survival. The final brutal truth is this: medieval weapons weren't elegant instruments for a noble art. They were brutally efficient tools, each designed for one purpose: to end the fight as quickly and decisively as possible, before your opponent does the same to you. They were a product of a deadly arms race where every new piece of armor was met with a new way to defeat it. Once you understand this, every Hollywood sword fight will look less like history and more like a beautifully choreographed but ultimately ridiculous fairy tale. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the brutal reality of medieval combat. If you found this as fascinating as I do, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next dive into history. Let me know in the comments what historical myth you'd like me to bust next. Until then, stay curious. Creating a quality sword was a masterful art. It started with carefully selected iron ore, which was smelted in a bloomery furnace. This wasn't about getting pure iron, it was about creating bloom, a spongy mass of iron and slag. The blacksmith then had to repeatedly heat and hammer this bloom to force out the impurities and consolidate the iron into a usable billet. This process, called forging, was incredibly labor-intensive. Early medieval smiths, like the Vikings, would take rods of different types of iron, some hard, some soft, and twist and forge them together. This created a blade that was both flexible enough to absorb impact without shattering and hard enough to hold a killer edge. You can see these incredible wavy patterns on surviving historical blades. It was a complex, beautiful, and deadly form of metallurgy. So what was the single best weapon? The truth is, there wasn't one. It's like asking, what's the best tool? It completely depends on the job. For a knight in full-plate armor, a longsword or a poleaxe was fantastic for finding gaps or delivering crushing blows. For an unarmored skirmisher, a nimble arming sword or a falchion might be better. A soldier in a tight formation would prefer a spear. Context was everything. The best weapon was the one that gave you the advantage against your specific opponent in your specific environment while wearing your specific armor. A battle wasn't a rock-paper-scissors game with weapons. It was a lethal chess match where every choice mattered. The real ultimate weapon wasn't the steel in a warrior's hand, but the knowledge and training in their head. I hope this gives you an even deeper appreciation for the skill and science behind medieval combat. It was a brutal but incredibly sophisticated world.